There's our color intro, and now a transition, and this is chapter 9 of How to Develop Your Thinking Ability, otherwise known or later known as Taming Your Mind. And we'll talk some more about where we are after the chapter, which I think will be fairly short. So here we go. Tool number 6, the Where Index, chapter 9, Marking the Spot. It starts with a quote from Wendell Johnson: "To a mouse, cheese is cheese. That is why mousetraps are effective." And that's from the book People in Quandaries by Wendell Johnson. He was a student of Korzybski's, and that's a very interesting book about general semantics from a psychological perspective. In the past 5 chapters, we have discussed 5 characteristics of our world that make it difficult for us to make adequate verbal maps. Do you remember which tools for thinking help us meet these pitfalls to straight thinking? 1. Since it is impossible for us to know all about anything, we never have all the facts before us when making a decision. 2. Things are not quite so clear-cut as the verbal maps we make. Nothing is pure black or pure white. It is necessary for us to survey the territory thoroughly to find out to what extent it has the characteristic in which we are interested. 3. We have minds that subtly twist things to fit in with our personal interests. 4. No two things in this world are absolutely identical, and sometimes we are misled when we suppose that two things will act alike because they have the same name. 5. Things have the annoying habit of changing from time to time in ways that frequently make our verbal maps out of date. We are now ready to take up the last of our tools for thinking: environmental differences. Where a thing is used often makes a lot of difference. The costume department of one of the larger Hollywood studios submitted sketches of a rather revealing gown to censors for approval before shooting. "The attached gown will be all right," came back the reply, "if it's an evening gown to be used in a nightclub scene. But if it's a nightgown to be used in the bedroom scene, it's definitely out." In other words, gown 1 in a nightclub has a different effect from gown 1 in a bedroom, the difference being where it is used. We come now to the third of our indexes, the Where Index. Like the What and When Index, the Where Index also helps us to avoid being tripped up by differences. You will recall that the What Index says to us, you shouldn't expect two things to act alike just because they are called by the same name, or even because they look alike. Since no two things in this world are absolutely identical, you may get stuck by one of the differences, The index numbers should remind you of the differences. The when index says, don't blindly assume that things are exactly as they used to be, or you may be fooled. Now the where index says to us, any particular person or thing may act differently when put in a new place, or a new situation, a new environment, under new circumstances, or under new conditions. Although for convenience we are calling it the where index, actually we're going to use it in a little broader sense than the word where implies. It could be called the environment index. The where index represents the whole environment surrounding any person or thing, and reminds us that when parts of the environment change, there may be changes in the way man one or thing one will act. And as with all differences, sometimes the changes may be important for our purposes, or they may be so slight that we may ignore them. Let me get a little drink here. The man whose character was hit by a train. Sometimes a small and apparently insignificant change in our environment can make a great deal of difference in the way we act. Robert M. Yoder illustrated this by a humorous story published in the Saturday Evening Post. Every day after leaving work at 5 o'clock, Winmere Tuttle would toddle into the corner bar for 2 martinis. It was always 2 martinis because his train to the suburbs left at 5:25 and he didn't dare miss his train. Now Toby Gintle also dropped into the same bar after work, but Toby's train didn't leave until 6:03. By this time he was up to his fatal 4th drink, and sometimes he would even stay until the 6:37. He would get home with the load on, fall asleep after dinner, and hence saw little of his wife and 4 darling children. Gintle had tried to persuade Tuttle to miss a train with him, but Tuttle could never be tempted. Gintle regarded him with envy as a resolute man who had his life well programmed. Then fate took a hand in Gintle's affairs. Fate in the form of those masters of whimsy and irrelevance who make up suburban train schedules. Gintle's train was moved forward to 5:02. When he had time for a drink, he wore it off sprinting for the train. Usually he got home before 6 o'clock, cold sober. This gave him so much time of evenings that he began inventing games to combat advanced boredom, and so prevalent is boredom that the games earned him $3,000 in March alone, and 4 times that much in Philadelphia. Gintle is now held up as a model of industry and self-control. As for Winmere Tuttle, you can find him almost any night, hung on a bar like a coat thrown over a chair, telling some stranger that life is a riddle in double talk. For they changed Winmere's train to 6:07, and at his moderate pace of 9 minutes to the martini, Winmere has become one of the town's worst lushes. And that's from the story of Two Drink Tuttle, whose character was hit by a train, from Robert M. Yoder, reprinted with the kind permission of the author and the Curtis Publishing Company. Copyright 1948. When we say this with When we say this with indexes, we find that Good Husband, Winmere Tuttle, with suburban train leaving at 5:25, acts differently from Barfly Winmere Tuttle, with suburban train leaving at 6:07, and Pie-Eyed Toby Gintle, whose train left at 6:03, acts differently from Smart Toby Gintle, whose train leaves at 5:02. When any person or thing is moved to a new place or put in a new situation, there may be significant changes in the things that interact with them, such as the attitudes of people, the temperature, the humidity, atmospheric pressure, amount of light and dark, the pollen count of the air, and many other things. For example, when a certain type of allergy leaves a place, For example, when a person with a certain type of allergy leaves a place that is relatively pollen-free and goes into a place where there is much pollen in the air, he will change from a well person to an extremely sick person. The Where Index. Everything that exists at a specific place under specific circumstances. Any verbal map that tries to represent the territory as completely as possible should include the Where Index. The Where Index is simply information added to your verbal map that tells the location or the important environmental factors that may influence the person or thing you are talking about. The Where Index will remind you that any person or thing may act differently in a different situation. Chair in your living room will not act the same as chair kept in a damp basement. And I didn't put the index number on the chair in those two cases. It really should have been chair 1 in your living room will not act the same as chair 1 kept in a damp basement. Whether chair 1 stays in good condition or collapses with your dignity will depend on where it is kept. You know that your car radio out in the open does not sound the same as your car radio going under a steel bridge. It acts differently in different places. Suppose we pack a picnic lunch and go out to Surprise Lake for a day's fishing. But just after we get to the lake, the clouds roll up and a steady rain throws a wet blanket on our party. Since it looks pretty dreary, we quickly get back in the car and travel home with glum thoughts of the big fish we might have caught that day. We get home about noon and spread our picnic lunch out on the dining room table. The picnic lunch on the dining room table tastes pretty flat. It lacks the tang that the same picnic lunch would have had after a morning of fishing at Surprise Lake. In other words, a picnic lunch at Surprise Lake is not picnic lunch. Should have had the 1 in both of those. The what index tells us that picnic lunch 1 is picnic lunch 1, but the where index reminds us that picnic lunch 1 may taste differently to us in different places. Cheese is cheese. Wendell Johnson said, "To a mouse, cheese is cheese. That is why mousetraps are effective. If a human being wants to have a brain rating of more than 1 mouse power, he needs the indexes. Even mice can learn that cheese in a mousetrap is not the same as cheese on a pantry shelf." Play a game with yourself. Take out your watch and time yourself for 1 minute. See how many people and things you can think of that act differently when put into different situations. If in 1 minute's time you can think of 10 different things and 1 or more ways in which they will act differently in a new environment, you are doing fine. As a starter, consider your watch. Your watch in your hand may act differently from your watch underwater. And I'm not so sure how true that is these days. I'm sure that there are some watches that don't react well to being underwater, but there are a great many that'll do fine underwater. To sum up, the 3 indexes in review. The what index consists of numbers which remind us that there are no 2 things in this world that are alike, and that we must keep our eyes open for differences that make a difference. The when index or date reminds us that conditions in this world change from time to time, and the verbal maps that were quite adequate yesterday may mislead us tomorrow. The where index reminds us that any given person or thing may act differently when moved to a different place or placed in new circumstances. A person who indexes is able to keep an open mind with regard to new things. For example, I had never liked any eggplant I had eaten. After trying it a few times, it's easy for a person to generalize, "I don't like eggplant," and from then on say, "No, thank you." But a person who thinks in terms of indexed eggplant will realize that eggplant is not eggplant. That is, eggplant, fixed in new and different ways, may seem different from eggplant, the unpleasant remembrance of past eggplant. The other day, my wife served some eggplant that I found delicious. I could hardly believe it. I suspected that it was impossible. If I had been sure that eggplant is eggplant, I would have known in advance that I would not like it. With a closed mind, I would have missed something worthwhile. Perhaps someday I'll find that although I have not liked okra 1, okra 2, okra 3, etc., some okra 56 just hits the spot. To avoid being misled by the past, it's a good idea to index all your experiences. One should be careful, observed Mark Twain, to get out of an experience only the wisdom that is in it and stop there, lest we be like the cat that sits down on the hot stove lid. She will never sit on a hot stove lid again, and that's well, but she will also never sit down on a cold one anymore. And that's the end of chapter 9. That was a pretty short chapter. Let's go over a few of the drawings that were in chapter 9. That's the first one on page 133, and there's basically a guy on a camping trip who enjoyed a fish and the skeleton is left over, and at a restaurant he's complaining about a fish bone. I'm assuming that if you like these, you can use the pause button to get a decent picture of them. I realize it would have been better if I had prepared them ahead of time. Maybe a future higher production value would have that, although I also think it would be good to make an updated book. That a lot of the stuff here is terribly dated, but let's press on. The previous drawing had a title of "Where You Are Makes a Difference." This one has a title, "Different situations, circumstances, or surroundings bring out different aspects of people and things." With a labor shortage, it shows a guy working furiously at a desk and subsequently being chewed out by his boss, and actually his boss is grabbing him by the neck, which I guess that might have been okay at some point. And here we have, with a labor shortage, he's goofing off at his desk and then being given a cigar by his boss, who puts his arm around him. And then on the next page, 137, we have a title of "People Act Differently in Different Places and Situations." And a guy is trembling as he holds a baby in the background, and I presume his wife is showing a medal to another woman from a box. Then he received the Distinguished Service Medal, bravery in the face of enemy fire. And that's a very valid point. People are sometimes brave about some things and not others. And here we have on page 139, wonder if any of these were good enough to even see in a freeze frame. Car 1 left in sun is not like car 1 left in shade. And a man and a woman are coming to the car, and he opens the door for her, and she's surprised by how hot the seats are. It's in a convertible, so I wouldn't really expect a big problem, but that's what the drawing is. And let's see if that's, yeah, that's the whole chapter. Of how to develop your thinking ability, otherwise known as Taming Your Mind, by Ken Keyes Jr. This book was originally published under the title How to Develop Your Thinking Ability by the McGraw-Hill Book Company. It was copyrighted in 1950 by Kenneth S. Keyes Jr. and Roberta Reimer Keyes. And he was a student of Alfred Korzybski, who wrote Science and Sanity. And this is selections from Science and Sanity, which is available on Amazon as a new book for like $11. Taming Your Mind is often available for around $5 plus maybe $4 or $5 shipping. And let's see. I don't think I have too much else to say with this chapter. The rest of the book, is less directly teaching how to do general semantics and is much more general advice. I think there is a summary of the 6 tools coming up. So I'm not sure whether I'll be reading the next chapter or I'll do a kind of free-form summary of it. If you have any opinion about that, if you're watching this on YouTube, by all means make a comment. If you're receiving the MP4 files in email or getting them through some other method, feel free to provide feedback however is appropriate for your method. Thank you for watching these, and if you're on YouTube, by all means subscribe and comment. And when you subscribe, if you choose the notification icon, you'll find out when we're doing live streams. And I'm not sure what else. I don't think there is much else. Thank you for watching. And this is March 18th, 2023 at 1:33 a.m. And we're going to stop streaming now.